Good morning. Good morning, everyone. Is the microphone on? Good morning. Oh, this works. It's not working. Hello? 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 I feel like Adele. Get it? Adele, hello? Yeah, okay, great. Hello, everyone. My name is David Simmons, and I'm an executive member of the Canadian Club of Toronto's board and your host. Thanks for joining us in person, and welcome to our online viewers. Our club has always been a forum for public figures, thought leaders, and decision makers to share their ideas. Here, we offer access to dynamic political, business, and public personalities. The Mayor of Toronto is one of them. The ability to connect with you and leaders in a forum like this wouldn't be possible without the support of our sponsors. This morning, I would like to acknowledge the support of CPA Ontario. They are represented today by Luca Bucci. Thank you for your support. Our club loves to ensure that as many young, upcoming leaders can attend our events with the assistance of kind donors. And today, we knew it would be an important conversation to include a number of students in the room. Today, we have students that we want to welcome from C.W. Jeffries, sponsored by Bell. Thanks to Simon Dwyer. Where's C.W. Jeffries? Wave, there we are. Thanks for being here. And we also have the thinkers, the movers, and the shakers from Ryerson's Leadership Lab, sponsored by the Canadian Club of Toronto. Where are the Ryerson Leadership Lab team? There they are. Thank you for being here. I also want to acknowledge some notable guests joining us this morning. We have the Mayor of Kitchener, Barry Verbanovich, City of Toronto Councillor and Deputy Mayor Anna Bilo, Councillor Brad Bradford, Councillor Paula Fletcher, Councillor Cynthia Lai, Councillor Jennifer McKelvey, and Councillor Michael Thompson. It's good to have you with us, and thank you for working hard on behalf of the City of Toronto and our province. Now I'm happy to introduce today's speaker. Toronto is a city on the move. We're growing and we're developing at an unprecedented rate. You see signs of our growth all around us, whether it's in the construction cranes that dot the skyline or the traffic snarls that contribute to the hustle and bustle of our streets. We're on the world stage like never before, whether it's being atop the leaderboard in sports, arts, and entertainment, or business. We're a city whose time has come. Born and raised in Toronto, Mayor John Tory has spent his life giving back to the city he loves through his tireless work in public, the private sector, and in philanthropic roles. Elected as Toronto's 65th mayor in 2014 and re-elected in 2018, John Tory is focused on delivering on his mandate to provide leadership for a city that works. He's working to get more transit built and to get more affordable housing built. We've seen that in action with the success of the Housing Now program launched this last year. This program will take 11 surplus city-owned sites and convert them to more than 10,000 homes, including 3,700 affordable rental units. I think that deserves some applause. Mayor Tory has kept taxes low while investing in priority services, including poverty reduction and modernizing government services that Torontonians rely on. Under Mayor Tory's leadership, Toronto has attracted jobs, attracted investments, and emerged as an undisputed center of innovation and opportunity on the world stage. The mayor's success can be seen in the success of our city. Toronto is a growing global powerhouse. All of this is in part thanks to this mayor and the way he leads the city in a strong, calm, and responsible manner. He's known for putting in long hours, 7 days a week. Mayor Tory is a fixture at festivals and events across the city. I think my niece and nephew might think he's Santa Claus. This past Saturday, for example, he put in 13 hours, starting with the Heritage Plaque unveiling at Columbus Centre and ending at the Cavalcade of Lights in Nathan Phillips Square. Toronto Life summed up Mayor Tory's leadership recently, saying the following: in 2019, when no politician seemed immune to scandal or bouts of stupidity, it was a luxury to have a competent, drama-free workhorse in our corner. It's my honor to introduce our mayor, His Worship, John Tory.
Well, thank you for that kind introduction. I think on the bouts of stupidity part, there'd be a number who might take issue with that, starting with my wife. But having said all that, I'm not going to argue with what Toronto Life says, or the Toronto Sun, Adrian. I argue with that from time to time. May I begin by saying thank you to the Canadian Club for this invitation to be here, and apologize to you for the hour, but it's clear that many people like this morning format. I'm a morning person, so for me, if they said I had to give a speech at 6:30 or do anything else at 6:30 or even 6 o'clock, I'd be happy. Barb, my wife, says that the best moment of her day is when I say goodbye to her when I leave in the morning, because she knows she has 2 hours left to sleep. And so, I guess different strokes for different folks. But I also want to congratulate Phil Gillies and just assure the rest of you that was not a fix. I mean, Phil is somebody I've known for, I think, probably 40 or more years, and that I would draw his name out, which just proves you should never ask politicians to do the draw, because you make one person happy and all the rest of the people here unhappy. But having said that, it's a pleasure that I was able to make him happy today. I am delighted to be joined, as was mentioned, by a number of my colleagues. And I just want to say that while obviously they are not all of the members of Toronto City Council, they are among the people that are handling some of the most sensitive files as we go forward. Michael Thompson is the person in charge of economic development. And, the fact of the matter is this city is booming at the moment, and that's not something you take for granted. In fact, what I'm going to talk about today is really the steps that we have to take, and quite frankly, how we have to pay for it in order to keep the city moving forward. Anna Bailau, the results of a lot of her work were just seen yesterday in the release of a new housing action plan for the next 10 years, and it's an outstanding piece of work that she led on. Gary Crawford looks after the budget, which of course is fundamental, and the other councillors who are here are doing a great job. In fact, three of the ones that are here, Cynthia Lai, Jennifer McCalvary, and Brad Bradford, are new, but I can assure you they're making a significant contribution. And the other, Paula Fletcher, is a veteran who is helping in a number of areas, whether it's film, the waterfront, our real estate initiatives through Create TO, and so I really appreciate their help, because the city level of government, I think, as you know, is a partnership. You cannot, the mayor, frankly, is not a position that is invested with a lot of inherent power. You have a very powerful platform, but you need to have, and I've certainly benefited from the cooperation of the members of council to get things done, which I think we're doing. And of course, none of it would be possible without a very excellent public service that we have, and they are also well represented this morning, and I appreciate that. Our city manager, Chris Murray, is here. I was in Hamilton speaking to the Chamber of Commerce yesterday, along with Jan De Silva, who was kind enough to come, and I actually went there and said a number of nice things about Hamilton, which for an old Argo fan like me was difficult for me to do. But what I was able to say to them as well is how fortunate we were to get Chris Murray as our city manager. He was previously the city manager in Hamilton. And I said, when they talk about a sports trade, they say you acquired somebody for future considerations. And I said, now that I know how valuable Chris is, I'm not sure what the future considerations could possibly be coming from us. But he's just an outstanding leader that we're lucky to have, and he's ably assisted by a number of senior officials, including some deputy city managers, Juliana Carboni and Josie Scioli, and his chief financial officer, Heather Taylor, who are all here this morning, and also the CEO of the TTC, Rick Leary. And we're blessed. It's been one of the experiences that I've had that is not new to me, but you get reminded when you have a job like this and you work so closely with public servants what an incredibly noble profession this is, and how incredibly lucky we are to have people serving in the public service who are just incredible professionals who write reports. I mean, people will scoff at city reports. You should read them sometime and see the amount of work that goes into every decision and how it gives you the history of what's been done, and it's just incredibly professionally written, and I think we're lucky to have the public servants we have, from the people who write those reports through to the people who keep the streets clean and keep our ice rinks going and all that, and we're just very blessed, and I appreciate their help very much. as you all, those of you who are the older you get, the faster time passes by, and that's just the truth. About a year ago this week, I began my second term as the mayor of this great city, and I can just tell you every day, whether it's that roster of events that you mentioned in that kind introduction, you are reminded of what an honor and a privilege it is to serve as the mayor of the city. And I will just tell you that I embrace the job with the same enthusiasm and the same energy that I did the day that I walked into the mayor's office 5 years ago. I was reelected. I was lucky enough to be reelected, and you never take these things for granted, in 2018 in every ward across the city. And that was important to me because it meant that I had the general concurrence of people from right across the city to bring the city together, which was really important. And that's a daily challenge that exists in this job, just because the city has many disparate parts and it is diverse in many different ways. But I did get what I believe to be a strong mandate to get things done. And it's fundamentally, the mandate is to work with other governments and to work with the members of the City Council to get things done, which will make sure that this incredible run of success that we're on continues. Because after all, isn't that really what you're trying to do? To make sure that 10 years from today, as a result of the decisions you make today, the city can be as successful as it is right now. And so we have a mandate to get transit built. We have a mandate to get affordable housing built and to continue with the prosperity and the stability that the city has enjoyed, because I think that stability, which is created, I think, by responsible and accountable government and frankly, the responsible and accountable approach that I've tried to bring to the leadership of the city on a personal basis, combined with an unwavering determination to work with other governments, even when it has been difficult. And, I've had no hesitation in standing up for Toronto when the occasion required, but by and large, I would see that my task, and we'll discuss that this morning, is to work with the other governments to get them to help us in the cause of building a better city. And so as a result of that approach, and it's a two-way street, it takes two to sit down, we have in place a transit agreement with the province, and that's something that a year ago you would have said was highly unlikely. And that transit agreement will see almost $30 billion coming from the provincial and federal governments to be expanded in transit expansion. And I want to thank Premier Doug Ford and Transportation Minister Caroline Mulroney for working with us, for having the patience. The same is true of the government of Prime Minister Justin Trudeau. They worked with us and they've had the patience to sit together and to figure out a way in which we could get the transit expansion done that just has to get done. And of course, the challenge now is not just to develop the plan, which we've done, but to actually get the transit built. Similarly, we have a Housing Now plan that will add 11,000 housing units, as was mentioned, including more than 3,000 affordable rental units on 11 city-owned surplus land sites. And this is an initiative, just to put it into context, and again, it's a development that took place some time ago, but it was lauded at the time for the scale that it represented. It's a development that is 3 times the size, or an initiative 3 times the size of the St. Lawrence community development. It's a plan introduced the day after I was reelected because we knew we needed to get on with it, and we're already proceeding to market on many of these sites to actually get housing built along an expeditious timeline because, of course, as you know, the need is there. And so people will be living in these new rental units, many of them affordable units, as early as 2022. And given how things go when it comes to construction and government projects for that matter, I think that is going to be quite an accomplishment to get things done on that kind of a timeline. We've secured, again through this cooperation and constant determined advocacy, $1.3 billion from the Government of Canada to invest in social housing repairs. At our City Council meeting just last week, we approved a plan to make sure that Toronto community housing is adequately funded and self-sustainable for the first time since it was downloaded onto municipal taxpayers, and this will ensure that no units will close, other than those we consciously decide to close, because there are instances, as you know, where it is better to replace a unit than it is to try to repair it. But if you think back to where we were, when I became mayor, we had none of the contribution from the other governments to help us with these repairs, and it was just assumed that we were supposed to look after it ourselves, which municipal tax base is incapable of doing. And today, after determined advocacy and just pressing and pressing and pressing, the Government of Canada has recognized its role in helping with Toronto community housing. And similarly, the Council has stood up and accepted, albeit that we think the other governments should take a greater role in helping us with Toronto community housing, especially the province, that Toronto community housing requires a sustainable business model in order to avoid us slipping right back in to the place we were before, with a huge backlog of repairs and, frankly, living conditions for people in Toronto community housing that none of us would accept. This new permanent funding formula between the city and TCHC results in the largest single investment in the Toronto Community Housing Corporation since social housing was downloaded by the province 2 decades ago. And I would remind you that has been done within the context of a property tax increases for operating purposes that have been at or below the rate of inflation. It is possible. Those who set up the false choice between having high property taxes and that solely spelling out your ability to do things and to take initiatives and to increase funding for things like transit and housing are setting up a false choice. It is a false choice. That is not to say, and by the way, when it comes to the investment that we've now made on an ongoing basis, because we put this funding framework in place for the future, as well as for this year, that the Ontario government should not be stepping up and taking more responsibility for TCHC, but for now, we have stepped up and taken the responsibility that somebody has to take in order to make sure those buildings, our public assets, the homes to many of our fellow residents, are properly maintained. We've moved ahead with increased investment and focus on road safety to eliminate pedestrian and cyclist deaths. We've done things like road designs, lower speed limits in hundreds of places across the city, and we've increased enforcement, including automated speed enforcement, which after 4 years of advocacy, we finally had permission to do earlier this week, together with more red light cameras that we previously were able to use, because technology is just a more effective way to enforce those laws than police officers who can't possibly be on every street corner. We've increased investments in community safety to deal with what I believe we all agree has been an unacceptable amount of gun violence in our city. And we've just come to the end, or we're coming to the end of a $1 billion construction season this year to upgrade infrastructure across the city, continuing to make the long overdue investments that we simply must make in our city's aging transportation and water infrastructure, both because it's basic to the proper functioning of a city and because it is going to help us to continue to attract investment and residents, and because it just makes sense from the standpoint of public assets that belong to us and that should be kept in proper order. How overdue are some of these projects on infrastructure repair that aggravate you, because when you drive along Richmond Street or Jarvis Street, you wonder, why are we doing these things? Well, on Jarvis Street, our crews are replacing a water main with parts that are 161 years old, pieces of pipe and conduit that are older than Canada itself. And we were actually relying on that infrastructure in the heart of our city to supply us with water. And on Richmond Street, I think the age of the infrastructure there, some of it 140 years old. But we're finally replacing it so that those growing neighborhoods, and that's where development is taking place, will have reliable, modern, safe water service, and we're repeating that important state of good repair work underground and above ground across our city. These are good, necessary, responsible steps that have to be taken in making sure that the quality of life in our city and the attractiveness of our city for its residents and others who we want to come here will continue for people that are here now and for people in the future. And when you talk about people in the future, people continue to come here. What a blessing that is for us. What a statement of confidence that it is in Toronto that we are the fastest growing city in North America. 70,000 new people arriving in the last year alone, almost 1 million more people expected before 2041. To put this into context, Toronto grows by the size of Burlington every 7 years. That's the rate of growth that is taking place here. And so that gives us an urgent need to address the growth and to build a city that can continue to be a great home for everyone who wants to live here. A prosperous city like ours and the region, and I'm very delighted that my friend Barry Burbanovich, the Mayor of Kitchener, is here, because of course our prosperity is a shared enterprise where we are relying on the success and the prestige of the Kitchener technology center of activity in particular, but many other things that they have to bring to the party. And I think they rely on us to the same extent, the excellence that we have in both of those places. But there are still issues that we have to face, and one of the themes that I want to emphasize with you this morning is that we are long past the point where Toronto taxpayers and the City of Toronto alone can address the issues of the entire region. There will be an efficiency study released today, and I'll give credit where credit is due. The provincial government offered us some money to finance taking a look at our own operations to see if there were ways in which we could do things better, and we took advantage of that, and that work was done by Ernst & Young. And the study, in its preamble, in effect, notes in particular that Toronto has taken on an outsized role in the region, bearing a disproportionate burden for a number of services, including, but not limited to, public housing, transit, transportation, and social services. And just as you might remember what I said about the age of some of the infrastructure we're replacing, so that when you're aggravated in traffic jams, you'll put that into context, let me just give you a few other facts that are found in this Ernst & Young report. So it's coming from them, even though I could have told you the same facts. Toronto provides 90% of the public housing in the GTA, 27% of the total social housing in the entire province of Ontario, in respect of which the province pays basically nothing. Close to 40% of all trips on the Gardiner and the Don Valley Parkway, roads owned and maintained entirely at the expense of City of Toronto taxpayers, 40% of those trips begin and end outside of Toronto, in other parts of the province than the 416. And yet the city receives no financial help with the hundreds of millions of dollars it costs over time to properly maintain those roads. Close to 13%, think about this one for a minute, close to 13% of all TTC trips either begin or end outside of the City of Toronto, and yet we receive no outside financial help with the operating costs of the TTC, which you, as city taxpayers, heavily subsidize each and every year. In the past 5 years, unlike the rest of the region, we've massively increased shelter and homelessness programs, and we have accounts, many of them, of people who come from other parts of the region and seek shelter here. And as Torontonians, we say when they seek shelter, we provide it to them because they're fellow human beings. We've just gone from 4,000 shelter and respite spaces to more than 8,000 shelter and respite spaces during the time that I've served as mayor. And I regret to say that those spaces are occupied. But on the other hand, I'm proud to say that when people are in need of shelter, that we provide it. But the question remains, should we be doing it largely on our own? Almost 40% of the spaces in our shelter system are occupied by refugee claimants and asylum seekers. And while we have advocated relentlessly and have been successful, in fairness, in obtaining more than $70 million in federal funding for those costs, we have continued to move people through the system. The refugees are remarkably successful at obtaining employment and housing while their situation is assessed, but a steady flow of people arriving in our city continues. We expect for this year, for example, and this is part of what Councillor Crawford has to cope with in being the budget chair, there will be a $76.9 million pressure in the city's budget in 2020. And I will again be urging Prime Minister Justin Trudeau and Immigration Minister Marco Mendicino to help us fund this cost, which should not be borne, again, by the City of Toronto taxpayers alone. So these facts are very important and put a lot of things into context. They show that as a city, we are not only producing the success, the 20% of the country's GDP that helps to lift the country up as a whole, but that we are also showing the way in providing the support and the investments in people and in the city that are going to lead to further success, which benefits the entire province and benefits the entire country. These issues land on our doorstep because, as you know, most people will pick up the phone or go on their email and contact their municipal government first. But our ability to fill this gap that has been created over time by the inaction of others is not infinite, and it's not indefinite. I highlight it only to show the important role that the city plays in the work that we will all continue to do as a council to make sure that other governments come to the table to address regional, provincial, and national problems. And while from time to time I've had to take on the other governments in a more adversarial way to protect the interests of Toronto, I try to work more on the basis of persuasion and advocacy and relentless appearing in front of them and darkening their doors and sidling up to them at events to say to them, you really should be helping us because it is in your best interest as the Government of Ontario or the Government of Canada as much as it is in the best interest of Toronto itself. And these represent only the beginning of the major pressures that the budget is facing. We have a TTC State of Good Repair budget accumulated over many, many years for the existing system that is at $33 billion over the next 15 years, $24 billion of which is just to upgrade and maintain our existing subway system. We came to office, this council, and frankly I came to office, facing a multi-billion-dollar Toronto community housing State of Good Repair backlog, and the real threat at that time of units actually closing at a time when we were desperately short of units. They were going to close simply due to lack of attention. And we did obtain the $1.3 million from the federal government after a lot of hard work, and we put forward, importantly, $1.6 billion of our own city taxpayer money in order to tackle this problem head-on. And though the Government of Ontario slowed cuts to our budget and reversed some retroactive cuts that they brought forward, we know that they have indicated there is less money coming from Queen's Park, including the loss of promised, committed gas tax money, which we had expected to bring in $1 billion over 10 years. These are major pressures. And in response, each and every year that I've been mayor, we've worked to find efficiencies to keep the cost of city government low so that we can invest in key city services like transit, like recreation, like community safety, while keeping annual property tax increases low, particularly out of deference to lower income residents, especially seniors, who might well have an affordability issue if we weren't keeping a lid on property tax increases. So every year, we make a concerted effort to find efficiencies in order to maintain property tax increases at the rate of inflation, while at the same time investing more, not less, in city services. Again, there is information put out there that would lead you to believe that this city is investing less. And in fact, we will this coming year, as we did this year, invest a record amount in transit, a record amount in housing, and other areas that we're putting more into than we ever have before, notwithstanding the fact that we've kept property tax increases modest so that people will not find their affordability issues made worse by their city government. I am proud to say that each and every year that I have been mayor, and this is the 6th budget that I've worked with Councillor Crawford on now, he is a glutton for punishment, agreeing to stay in this job for a second term, although we're only a year in, so he hasn't said anything about next year yet. But we have at one and the same time done all of those things, found efficiencies, kept property taxes increases at the rate of inflation, and significantly expanded services. And that has led our international credit rating firm, Moody's Investor Services, to credit the city's, and I quote, sound governance and prudent fiscal planning, as they have maintained our strong credit rating. While limiting the property tax increases for day-to-day operating budget purposes, 3 years ago we did introduce a separate city building levy to help invest directly and only in major transit and housing capital initiatives. And I think you're all familiar with the concept of budgeting separately for both. In the enterprises you work in, it's routinely done. And so too do we have to identify, obviously, the capital priorities and budget for them separately. And so the dedicated levy that we brought in, actually its predecessor was brought in by former Mayor Rob Ford. By doing so, we ensured that we had the funding available to partner with the other governments to build the smart track stations in the City of Toronto, to transform the Yonge and Bloor subway station from the overcrowded state that it finds itself in today. And these are things we need to do as we expand our transit system and make up for years of inattention. And believe you me, it helps me immeasurably when I go forward as the principal advocate on behalf of the City of Toronto to get the funding for housing and transit, to be able to say we have done our share and we've asked our residents to step up and do our share. And we know that the work to make sure the house is kept in good order is never done. And that is why we're happy, for example, that this very same Ernst & Young report that talked about the outsized burden that we bear in the region also has helped us to identify further efficiencies. Millions, tens of millions of dollars in efficiencies they found in a relatively short period of time, and those will be implemented in the 2020 budget that will come forward shortly and lead to not only tens of millions in repeated savings and expanded savings in future years, but savings that will carry on in the life of the government as we go forward. And this includes measures that will not hurt people. It's things that really relate more to what I call the hygiene of city government, contract compliance, changes to how we purchase and procure services, where they have identified sums that are real and significant that we can achieve if we work a little bit differently. But the work to save residents money doesn't just stop at the budget. Earlier this year, I announced and City Council unanimously approved Modern TO. This is a very far-sighted plan to save the city millions of dollars a year by maximizing and modernizing how we use office space. So we will go, for example, from 52 different workplaces in which the city carries on its business to 20. And we will go from quite a big reliance on leased office space to more efficiently using the space that we own in the civic centers and various places like that. This will produce a savings of $750 million over 25 years because we're using our own space better and getting out of expensive leases. And I know that's bad news for the landlords, but that's not my problem. We will maximize the use and value of other lands that we own in order to make sure that we can say to the taxpayers we are doing the task of accommodating the government in a very efficient way. This is a good common sense initiative that will save money and help our government to work better. But what the Ernst & Young report also shows, and what we are hearing from our professional city staff, is that despite our continuing efforts to run an efficient and responsible government, we need to do more to make sure we're actually building up the city. We're saving millions each year, but we still need to invest billions to build for the future and to invest in maintaining what we've built so far and to invest in the continued success of the city. And I will not, as mayor, carry on the old practice of just postponing these investments, sometimes indefinitely. That's why we are replacing the water mains, and that's why we invested $1 billion in our public works this year alone, because these were decisions in many cases, as evidenced by the 161-year-old water mains, that people just kept saying, well, we can put that over for a year or 2 or 3 or 4 or 10 or 20 or 50. Building up the city will take investments from the federal and provincial governments, and I make no apology for that. We are left under an archaic constitutional arrangement, but our Constitution is our Constitution, where we have very limited powers of taxation to raise money for municipal purposes. We have essentially property and commercial taxes, as you know. And so therefore, and certainly when it comes to social programs, which property taxes were never meant to finance, we must seek and secure partnerships with the other governments. And I can tell you right now, I am committed because it is necessary, not just desirable or not trying to pass anything off to anybody else. It is necessary we forge continuing partnerships with the other governments to help move this city forward. This city, the economic engine of all of Canada. But it is also going to take us doing what we can do to set an example, to show that we're prepared to put our own money where we have indicated is necessary for them to put money forward. 3 years ago, we tried to do something, and I will say we had very strong support from the City Council in doing so. We tried to do something a bit different, and that was to introduce road tolls on the Gardiner and the Don Valley Parkway, which would have helped us to raise millions of dollars, hundreds of millions of dollars, to invest in public transit, and would have helped us to manage some of the congestion issues that we face. That idea, interestingly enough, when it was brought forward by me, and I will say that we were a bit nervous about bringing it forward at the time because it involved some degree of political risk, something like that, it was widely accepted in most quarters. It was ultimately, and unfortunately, I say with deep regret, rejected by all of the political parties at Queen's Park and ultimately rejected by Premier Kathleen Wynne. And while I still believe that it could represent a viable solution and that not allowing us to proceed with it was wrong, I don't believe it is going to be something we will be permitted to proceed with in the current political climate. I just don't think that that's realistic. As I mentioned earlier, we were anticipating an increase in gas tax funding. This was provided as kind of a consolation for the fact that road tolls was cancelled. And this would have given us $1 billion additional to do some of the city building that we need to do over a period of 10 years. And it was offered to all municipalities in Ontario as a substitute for the road tolls that we had proposed. That increase has since been cancelled by the current provincial government, despite the fact that they made a campaign commitment to maintain it. And I will tell you that that decision, too, was the wrong decision in terms of building up the economic engine of this province. So the City of Toronto simply can't wait around for someday when road tolls might be approved or where gas tax funding might come back. We cannot lament the current political climate as a reason for inaction in our city. I'm not put together that way to sort of say, well, we can't do anything because nobody else will help us or because people canceled things they should have allowed to proceed. This is, at the present time, and I think there are many, many objective measures that tell us this, and it was referred to in the introduction. This is one of the most successful cities in the world right now. And it's successful not just in the context of jobs and investment coming here, but those jobs and that investment and the way we've been running the city allows us to do more and more to support people who need us to give them a little bit of support so they can be all they can be in a city that needs all hands on deck to fulfill our full potential. And so I intend to lead the city as best I can with my council colleagues to keep making the investments that is going to keep it that way, working with the other governments and working with other cities like Kitchener to get these things done. Specifically, what we have to do is take action in order to continue to invest in transit and in affordable housing. These are crucial social priorities, but they're also crucial economic priorities. And that is why, at the next City Council meeting coming up this month, I'll be asking to extend the City Building Fund further into the future. This was a levy that, as I indicated, was initiated by then Mayor Rob Ford to pay specifically for one transit project in Scarborough. But by approving an increase in this levy, which I will propose to the Council, 1% more, and extending it over the next 5 years, we can raise needed funds that will be dedicated to improving our existing transit system and building more affordable housing across our city. Ensuring that this is dedicated funding so people can make no mistake in their own minds when they pay their bills, the levy and their other bills that they receive. This is dedicated funding. It is money that will be protected through this term for the purposes of transit and housing only, as we have done thus far. They will know that it is collected and invested for one purpose, one set of dual purposes, building up and investing in transit and housing infrastructure. This funding, I assure you, is absolutely needed. And it's needed both because we have these obligations to invest to build the city up, but also so that we can demonstrate that we are prepared as the residents of the city, who will be the principal beneficiaries of these investments, that we are prepared to do our part to make those investments possible. It is the only way, given the limited current tools, and I've indicated to you how we've tried to take new approaches to raising money for transit and housing and not been successful in convincing the other governments to allow us to do that, especially the provincial government, and within the current political climate, that we can in fact raise the billions of dollars that we need to invest in the future of this city. So this measure, the 1% continued application on the city building levy, will help raise approximately $5 billion that we need to invest over the coming years in new subway signal systems, in new streetcars, in station upgrades, as part of the $30 billion transit agreement with the province. And let's remember, they are putting up the lion's share of that money and paying for most of the transit expansion. It will help to fund affordable housing projects so that we hit our target of approving 40,000 housing units within the next 12 years. And I will tell you that the question was quite fairly asked by the media yesterday when Deputy Mayor Bilo and myself outlined the Housing Action Plan. How are you going to pay for the rest of your share of that? Because we indicated we would pay a third of the cost of this entire project, which is about $24 billion. And we said we've already set aside $5+ billion in different places in our current budgeting. And the question was asked, where's the rest of the money going to come from? And a large part of that answer is provided by what I'm talking about today. We're at a key point in the history of the city, where we simply have to invest in the infrastructure of the city, and by infrastructure, we take that in a broad context to include not just transit, but also affordable housing. We have a provincial government right now, and I credit them for it, that is prepared to invest billions in transit, an amount actually beyond what we had expected when this government first came to office. We have a federal government that remained in office, thanks clearly to pledges that it made to continue to invest in the City of Toronto and its residents. You've heard me say often, the government of Prime Minister Justin Trudeau has been a good partner for the City of Toronto. And with this initiative of bringing forward the city building levy to apply for some of the years going forward, we will ensure that we will be seen first and foremost when we go and ask them to continue to partner with us, that we are already a partner at that table with a reasonable portion of the funding in order to get these things done. I think it will put me in a much better position, together with my colleagues, to continue advocating to those governments that increased sustainable investment in the economic engine of this country is good for Toronto, good for Ontario, and good for Canada. 3 years ago, I said, and it was mentioned this morning, that it was time to build. And that is still true. In fact, it is even more urgent now than it was 3 years ago. I am absolutely determined to continue to build up the city. I believe that is going to be a continuing task in front of me for every single day that I hold this office as mayor, to build up transit, to build up housing, and that is really what building up our future is about, in addition to all the investments we make in building up people, which is the most important investment of all. I think, yes, and that's worthy of it. I believe the City Council is ready to move forward. I'm optimistic when I bring this forward. It will go to the Executive Committee in just a few days' time and then on to City Council. I believe that they will understand and they will support the fact that this is a forthright, honest, straightforward, transparent step to say that when it comes to these very special and very significant capital needs on transit and on housing, which do have both of them. You know, we often think of transit as something that is just about 2 dots on a map. It is about connecting people to opportunity. That's the real reason you build transit. When you talk about getting people from point A to point B, what are they going to do? In many cases, they're going to pursue their education to lift themselves up. They're going to get a job. And that's why you build transit, and housing is the same thing. We know, especially in this climate, in this city at this time, the proper roof over your head is something that is fundamental to the personal success of people who live in this city, as well as fundamental to our economic success. And so I'm confident that when we get to the City Council in a very short period of time, that they will understand this is the right way to go. This is the best way forward to protect the prosperity that we've enjoyed in the last number of years, to protect the success that is globally recognized, to keep people coming here, the smart people from around the world who bring their ideas and their energy and their jobs and their investment to this city. Given our economic power and the need for that to continue, it is in the best interest of all of Canada. And I don't say that immodestly. They think Torontonians and mayors of Toronto and so on say this kind of thing all the time. The fact is, when you represent what we do, this region as a whole, together with our friends in Kitchener and elsewhere, to the success of this country, it is important we build up the city and move forward with the kinds of things that I've talked about today. And that is why I think this measure that I've shared with you today, as well as the efficiencies, which will make it possible for us to continue to invest on the other side of things, those are all important to the continued success of your city. And I hope that you will take the opportunity with your city councillors to express your support for these measures that I think are straightforward. I think they're easily understood by people, and they have right beside them a list of things that we're going to do with that money, which I think is something that people want to see when they are being asked to invest. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Mayor Tory. My name is Colleen Kennedy. I'm the Executive Director of the Canadian Club, and on behalf of the club, I want to thank you so much for all the fantastic ways you build our city up. We applaud your tireless efforts to build transit, develop infrastructure, and offer services that benefit city residents. I was particularly excited to hear about the water main replacement on Jarvis. It's older than the Canadian Club, 125 years, 161 is quite something. We all want to live in a prosperous, accessible, and safe city. Your solutions to addressing our challenges for growth are aspirational and hopeful. Thanks to your leadership, Toronto has attracted jobs and investment, and it is to many an undisputed destination. Mayor Tory, we salute your passionate advocacy for all things Torontonian. No matter what stage, podium, or table you show up at, we are always assured of your positive messages, hard work, encouragement, and support. We wish you and your council colleagues and staff continued success with all your city building plans. Thank you for all your work. Quickly before we close, I want to thank once more CPA Ontario for sponsoring today's event. And I would like to thank MediaEvents.ca and VVC for live streaming today's event. And I want to thank you all for joining us. Please have a wonderful day, and we hope to see you again soon.